The laughter hit her before she even understood what was happening. One moment, Naomi Brooks was standing in the most beautiful ballroom she had ever seen, holding a glass of sparkling water, telling herself that tonight was finally her night. The next moment, Gavin Pierce, the man with the perfect teeth and the corner office and the handshake that made everyone feel like they owed him something, pointed directly at her husband and said into a live microphone, loud enough for 400 people to hear, "And let's not forget Naomi brought her +1 tonight. Although I hear he's more of a permanent +1. You know, the kind that lives off the wife's paycheck and calls it a career." The room erupted, and Naomi, God help her, she laughed too. That single moment would cost her everything she thought she knew about the man she married. Before we go further, if stories about loyalty, hidden power, and the price of one small, terrible mistake keep you up at night, you are exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss what comes next. Drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you've ever stood in a room and laughed at something you should have defended, hit that like button, because this one is for you. The evening had started with so much hope. Naomi Brooks had spent 6 weeks deciding what to wear to the Hawthorne Logistics Annual Leadership Gala. 6 weeks going through her closet, standing in department store dressing rooms under fluorescent lights that made everything look worse, listening to her sister Dana on speakerphone while Dina said encouraging things that still somehow made Naomi feel smaller. She had finally settled on a deep burgundy gown, not because she thought she looked stunning in it, which she did not entirely believe, but because burgundy was serious, and serious meant people might actually listen to her when she talked about the Midwest expansion projection she had spent 11 months building from scratch. She was 41 years old. She had worked at Hawthorne for 9 years. She had never once been late, never once left a deadline unmet, and had quietly saved the company somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 million by restructuring their third-party carrier contracts 2 years ago. Nobody had said her name at an all-hands meeting to celebrate that. The CFO at the time had simply sent an email to the department that said, "Good work, team," without specifying who had actually done it. Naomi had learned not to expect the credit. She had learned a lot of things she wished she hadn't needed to learn. Her husband Lucien had helped her zip up the back of the gown without being asked, which was such a small thing, and yet it made her throat tighten in a way she couldn't explain. He had stood back and looked at her. Not the way people looked at her in elevators or grocery store checkout lines, with that flat, dismissive sweep of their eyes that she had grown so accustomed to she barely noticed it anymore, but with actual, unhurried attention. "You look like someone who's about to walk into a room and ruin everyone else's evening," he had said. "That's a strange compliment." "It was meant as one." That was Lucien. He had always talked like that, quietly, with a slight weight behind his words, as if he chose each one the way other people chose which door to open. She had loved that about him when they met. Lately it frustrated her more than she wanted to admit, because quiet men did not advance in rooms full of loud ones, and Naomi had spent years watching loud men get everything she deserved. She had kissed his cheek and told him the car service would arrive at 7. "I'll drive you," he had said. "Lucien, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He had driven her in the black Volvo he kept impeccably clean, playing low music she didn't recognize. Something classical, but not the stuffy kind. Something that moved. He had not asked her to explain why this gala mattered so much. He had not made one of those small, careful comments that some husbands make when they sense their wives are hoping for something specific, the kind of comment that hedges against disappointment. He had just driven. When he dropped her at the entrance and said he would park and come in after, she had almost told him he didn't need to come in at all. She hadn't said it, but she had almost said it. That almost would stay with her for a very long time. Inside the ballroom, Naomi had found her table, smiled at colleagues whose names she always remembered, even though they consistently forgot hers, and settled into the particular exhaustion of performing ease in a room where you do not entirely feel welcome. The ceiling was high and draped with white light. The tables had centerpieces so tall you had to lean sideways to see the person across from you. Everything smelled like money and floral arrangements that had been selected by someone who had never grown anything in their life. Her direct supervisor, a woman named Patricia, who had once told Naomi she carried herself surprisingly well for her size, touched her arm near the shrimp cocktail station, and said she hoped tonight would be a good night for the team. Patricia always said the team when she meant herself. Gavin Pierce arrived the way executives like him always arrived, about 12 minutes after everyone else, when the room was full enough for his entrance to register, laughing at something his own colleague had said even before he came through the door, so that by the time people looked up, he was already mid-laugh and looking successful at it. He was 53, silver-haired, and possessed of the particular confidence that comes not from having earned much, but from never having been told no in a room that mattered. He had worked at Hawthorne for 4 years. Naomi had watched him absorb credit the way dry ground absorbs rain, instantly, completely, without leaving a trace of where it actually came from. He had also, over the past year and a half, made a habit of stopping by Naomi's desk to ask about the Midwest expansion with the tone of someone who had invented the idea themselves. She had assumed it was his version of networking. She had been wrong about that, among other things. Lucien had arrived quietly, the way he arrived everywhere. He had found her at the table without her needing to wave or signal, weaving through the room with the unhurried certainty of a man who had never once worried about finding his way. He had sat beside her, ordered water, and done the thing he was remarkably good at, which was making her feel like the two of them were the only people in the room without making it obvious that was what he was doing. "This your expansion work on display tonight?" he asked her, low. "Hopefully," she said. "Then they should be thanking you." "That's not how it works here." He had looked at her with something she couldn't quite read, and then let it go, which was also something he was good at, knowing which conversations to release and which ones to hold. The dinner had passed without incident. 2 rounds of speeches. The usual applause for numbers that went up, and careful avoidance of numbers that went down. Naomi had been eating the dessert, a chocolate something she had not been able to identify, but had eaten anyway because the evening was wearing on her, and sugar was easier than conversation, when Gavin Pierce took the microphone for what was being billed as a toast to the future of Hawthorne. She had set down her fork. She had actually set down her fork because she thought he might mention her project. She would be embarrassed about that later, the small, private optimism of a woman who had earned something and still had to hope someone would notice. What Gavin said instead, with his perfect teeth and his practiced timing and his 400 witnesses, was this: "Before I get into the numbers, and we have some genuinely great numbers to talk about tonight, people, I want to say that events like these remind me what Hawthorne is really about. Excellence, ambition, people who show up and contribute, not people who just show up." He had paused then and let his eyes drift to Naomi's table. "I see we have a few +1s with us tonight. Nice of some of us to bring date support." A few chuckles, polite, the kind of laughter people offer before they know if something is actually a joke. Although, and I say this with love, I did hear a little rumor that one of our Naomi's +1 situation is more of a full-time arrangement. No offense to Mr. Brooks, or is it Moretti? Hard to keep track when the man doesn't seem to have a LinkedIn profile. More laughter, not polite anymore. "I mean, respect to the man. If my wife worked as hard as Naomi does, I might retire early too." The room had laughed. Some of them had laughed loudly. Some of them had looked at Naomi with the particular expression people wear when they are watching someone else suffer and are grateful it is not them. And Naomi, with 6 weeks of careful dressing and 11 months of ignored work and 9 years of professional survival calculus running through her nervous system in under 2 seconds, had smiled. Had even let out a short, small sound that was in the same family as laughter, just enough to signal that she was fine, that she was one of them, that the joke hadn't landed anywhere it shouldn't. That sound had come out of her body before her brain had approved it. Across the table, Lucien had gone completely still. Not tense, not visibly upset. Still. The way water goes still right before a temperature change you can't feel yet. He had looked at Gavin Pierce once, just once, and briefly, with an expression Naomi could not name, an expression she had never seen on his face in 12 years of marriage. Then he had looked down at his hands on the table. He had not said anything. He had not done anything. And somehow that stillness was the most frightening thing in the room, though Naomi could not have explained why. And she didn't have time to think about it because people were moving on and the moment was dissolving the way those moments do, into the general noise of a party that had found its rhythm and was picking up speed. She had not looked at her husband again for the rest of the night. That too would stay with her. The drive home had been quiet in a way that their silences usually weren't. Naomi and Lucien had built a marriage, among other things, on the comfortable kind of silence, the kind that doesn't ask anything from either person. This silence asked something. She could feel it asking, and she did not want to answer it. She had said, somewhere on the expressway, "Gavin's an idiot. Don't take it personally." Lucien had not responded immediately. The radio was off. The city lights moved across the windshield. "He embarrassed you," Lucien had said finally. "He embarrassed himself." "That's not what I mean." She had known it wasn't what he meant. "I didn't know what to do," she said. "I was surrounded by my colleagues. I was at a work event. I had to—" "You don't have to explain." "I'm not explaining. I'm just—" She had stopped. "I'm sorry." He had nodded once. Small. "Are you angry?" she asked. "No," he said. She had not believed him. Not entirely. But she had also not known what kind of anger she would have been asking about. Anger at her, at Gavin, at the room, at something larger and older she didn't have a name for. Lucien's inner life had always been like a building she could walk around but had only ever seen from the outside. She had thought she knew its shape. She was beginning to understand she did not know how deep it went. At home she had changed out of the burgundy dress and hung it back up, not because she intended to wear it again, but because she didn't know what else to do with it. She had stood in the bathroom for a long time with the water running. When she came out, Lucien was sitting at the kitchen table, not eating, not on his phone, just sitting with his hands flat on the table, looking at something only he could see. "Lucien." He looked up. "I really am sorry." He had looked at her for a long moment, that same unhurried, choosing look he had always given her. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She had assumed he was talking about work, about her day, about her schedule and her deadlines and the morning meetings she had to lead on the updated carrier projections. She had gone to bed. She had not slept well. She had lain in the dark and replayed the sound she had made, that small, cowardly sound, over and over, trying to count the cost of it, not yet understanding that the cost would be far greater than one sleepless night. What Naomi did not know, lying in that dark, was that her husband had not moved from the kitchen table. He had sat there for 2 hours with his hands flat and his eyes steady, the way men sit when they are not resting but calculating. At some point, close to 2 in the morning, his phone had lit up on the table in front of him. He had looked at the screen for a moment, then picked it up and said one sentence into it, quietly, in Italian, before setting it back down. 300 miles away, in an office above a building whose name never appeared in any public record, a man named Costa had received that sentence and understood immediately what it meant, and had spent the rest of the night making calls. The name Gavin Pierce had entered, by sunrise, into a conversation it would not leave again. And in a ballroom that had erupted in laughter at Naomi Brooks, at the table where she had made her quiet, terrible mistake, 2 men Naomi had assumed were event security had exchanged a single look and stood up straighter, because they were not event security. They had never been event security, and the man they served had just spoken. Naomi woke up at 5:43 in the morning with the specific, sour awareness that she had not actually slept. She had drifted in and out of something that felt like sleep, the way a parking lot puddle feels like a lake. Shallow, cold, and deeply unsatisfying. The ceiling of their bedroom was the same ceiling it had always been, and she stared at it for a long moment, listening. The apartment was quiet. Not the regular quiet of early morning, when Lucien would already be in the kitchen with the coffee going, and the low sound of something cooking, the particular domestic noise that had become the baseline of their life together. This was a different quiet, the kind that meant the kitchen was empty. She sat up. His side of the bed was made. Not slept in, and then made. The pillow was still centered, the comforter pulled flat. He had not come to bed at all. She found him not in the kitchen, but on the narrow balcony off the living room, standing with a coffee cup she could tell by its stillness had gone cold 20 minutes ago. He was dressed already. Not in the casual clothes he usually wore around the house, dark slacks, a charcoal button-down with the sleeves pushed up, shoes that she now noticed with a small, strange lurch, were ones she had never seen before. Good shoes. Serious shoes. The kind that cost enough money that you had to ask yourself where a man with no job had come by them. She had never asked that question before. She was asking it now. "You didn't sleep," she said. "No." "Lucien, about last night. I heard you the first time." Not sharp, just final, like a door that had already closed and wasn't going to open from that side. She came to stand near him and not beside him, which was a distinction she felt without being able to articulate it. "Are you leaving for something? You're dressed." He looked at the city below them. Chicago in early morning is gray and magnificent, full of pigeons and delivery trucks and the distant argument of train brakes on elevated tracks. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he has owned for a long time and is very familiar with the specific weight of. "I have some things to take care of today," he said. "What things?" "You never have—" She stopped herself. He turned and looked at her then. "I never have what?" "Nothing." "Finish the sentence, Naomi." She breathed out slowly. "I was going to say you never have anywhere to be." He looked at her for 3 full seconds without blinking. Then he nodded, once, the way he'd been nodding at her since they got home, that small, compact acknowledgement that told her nothing about what was underneath it. "That's fair," he said, and went inside. She was 20 minutes late to work, which had not happened in 3 years. She blamed the train, and then felt ridiculous for lying to herself about a thing that only she would ever know. The truth was, she had stood in front of her closet for too long, and then stood in the kitchen not eating the toast she'd made, and then sat in the car after parking the rental. She'd taken the rental because Lucien had the Volvo, and she hadn't asked to borrow it because she hadn't wanted to walk back out onto that balcony, and sat there for 7 minutes doing nothing identifiable. The office was already running at full speed when she got in. Hawthorne Logistics occupied 4 floors of a glass building on Michigan Avenue, and the morning after the gala had the specific energy of a place where people were still processing last night through the only language they had available to them, which was gossip dressed up as professional conversation. She heard her own name before she reached her desk. Don't know how she does it. Honestly, sitting there while he just... The voices dropped the moment she rounded the corner. 2 women from accounts receivable, both smiling at her with the warm, careful smiles people give you when they've been discussing something that concerns you. "Morning, Naomi," said the taller one, Sandra. "Morning." Naomi kept moving. Her desk was in the 4th floor open plan, near the windows, a position she had earned after 7 years by being the person who consistently delivered the work that made other people look organized. She sat down, turned on her monitor, and stared at the reflection of herself in the dark screen for the 2 seconds before it loaded. She looked tired. She looked more than tired. She looked like someone who had laughed at a joke they shouldn't have laughed at and had not yet finished paying for it. Her email had 41 new messages. She did not read a single one of them. She sat with her hands in her lap and thought about Lucien's shoes, those dark, unfamiliar shoes sitting on their balcony, and tried to remember if she had ever seen him spend that kind of money on himself. She couldn't. He cooked. He drove her. He kept the apartment so clean she sometimes forgot to notice it. He read books in the evenings and occasionally watched Italian football on the small television in the spare room, and never once complained that she worked late, or that she brought stress home with her, or that she could go 3 days without asking how his day was because she assumed his day had contained nothing worth reporting. That assumption now felt like a stone she'd been carrying for so long, she'd stopped registering the weight. Gavin Pierce arrived on the floor at 9:15. He stopped at 3 desks on the way to his office, laughing at something on his phone, and when he passed Naomi's desk, he glanced at her with the easy, untroubled expression of a man who had said something terrible the previous night and had since filed it away under good-natured ribbing and moved on. "Brooks," he said, by way of greeting. "Gavin," she said. He had already kept walking. She watched his back for a moment, the set of his shoulders, the particular arrogance of a man who had never once in his life considered that the room might not be on his side. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister, Dina. "Heard what happened at the gala. You okay?" She put the phone face down. At 10:30, Patricia stopped at her desk and said they needed to talk about the Midwest expansion timeline. not in a concerned way. In the way that suggested something had shifted in how the expansion was being discussed, and Naomi was going to find out what it was by sitting across a conference table and having it delivered to her with the vocabulary of team realignment. She followed Patricia into the small glass conference room. Patricia sat across from her and straightened a notepad she was not going to write on and said, "So, as you know, Gavin has been very involved in the expansion strategy lately." "I know that," Naomi said. "And given some of the conversations at the board level, which I'm honestly not fully looped into, Naomi, I want to be transparent about that. There's some thinking that we might restructure who's leading the external-facing component." Naomi felt the cold move through her stomach. "The external-facing component is the entire project." "It's not the entire Patricia." Naomi kept her voice level. "I have spent 11 months on this. The framework, the contracts, the carrier negotiations, every piece of it. And that work is invaluable." Patricia said invaluable the way people say it when they are about to demonstrate very specifically how little something is valued. "But Gavin feels, and the board seems to agree, that given the visibility of this rollout, we need someone in the lead role who is," she paused, searching for the word, "more client-facing." "More client-facing," Naomi repeated. "In terms of optics." The word sat between them on the table like something that had died. Naomi looked at Patricia, at her careful expression and her unchosen words, and understood completely, and without any remaining uncertainty, what was happening. Gavin Pierce had spent the gala humiliating her husband and was now spending the morning dismantling her career, and these two things were not unrelated. They never had been. "I need this in writing," Naomi said. Patricia blinked. "I don't think we need to formalize." "I need it in writing, Patricia. If my role is being changed, I need documentation of the change, the reason, and who authorized it. That's not negotiable." Patricia picked up the notepad she wasn't going to write on and looked at it. "I'll talk to HR." "Please do," Naomi said, and stood up and left the conference room before the heat behind her eyes could become visible. She made it to the women's bathroom on the 3rd floor before she stopped moving. She stood at the sink with the cold water running over her wrists, something her mother had taught her, that cold water on the pulse points was the quickest way to stop a feeling from taking over, and breathed. Her phone buzzed again. Not Dina this time. An unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. Then it buzzed again, same number. She answered. "Mrs. Moretti?" The voice was male, professional, carrying an accent she couldn't immediately place, somewhere between Italian and something older and more careful than Italian. "I think you have the wrong—" She stopped. Moretti was her husband's last name. She had kept her own name, professionally and otherwise, and the only person who regularly called her Mrs. Moretti was the woman at their building's front desk who had gotten it from the lease and never updated her mental file. "Who is this?" "My name isn't important right now. What's important is that you're aware of what's going to happen in the next 48 hours so that you are not frightened when it does." The cold water was still running. She turned it off. "What are you talking about?" "Mr. Moretti would prefer you hear this from him, but he asked me to make sure you were not blindsided." A brief pause. "He should have been the one to tell you many things, much earlier than this. That is something he acknowledges." "What things?" Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "What things should he have told me?" "I would encourage you, Mrs. Moretti, to go home this evening, and I would encourage you to sit with your husband and let him explain. There are people around you right now who are watching over you, and that will continue. You are safe. You have always been safe." That is not a reassuring sentence when it comes from a stranger on a phone. "No," the man said, and she had the unsettling impression that he was almost smiling. "I imagine it isn't. I'm sorry for the manner of this. Go home tonight." The line went quiet. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. At the woman in the burgundy, no, she'd changed. She was in gray today. At the woman standing in a fluorescent-lit bathroom being told by an unknown voice that she was safe. She had always been safe, as if that were a statement requiring confirmation from an outside party. What kind of person needed others to be told they were safe? What kind of person arranged for that telling? She went back to her desk. She did not go to Gavin's office. She did not cry. She pulled up the original Midwest expansion files, all 11 months of them, time-stamped, version-controlled, with her initials on every primary document, and she quietly, methodically copied them to her personal encrypted drive. Not because she was planning anything specific, because her body knew something her mind was still catching up to, which was that the ground under her was not the ground she had been standing on, and the smartest thing a woman could do on shifting ground was secure what she had built before the shift completed. At 2 in the afternoon, one of the junior analysts named Kevin, 24 years old, honest in the way young people are before the job teaches them otherwise, stopped by her desk and said quietly, not looking directly at her, "Hey, for what it's worth, we all know who did the Midwest work. Everyone on the actual team knows." She looked at him. "Thank you, Kevin. Gavin's been talking about it like it was his idea since March." "I know." Kevin nodded and walked away, and Naomi sat very still for a moment, because sometimes the small acts of witness are the ones that threaten to break you open, and she could not afford to break open right now. Not here, not in this office, not in front of these people. She left at 5 instead of her usual 7. People noticed. She didn't care. The train home was crowded with the end-of-day crush, and she stood holding the overhead bar and stared at the window and the dark tunnel beyond it, and thought about the phone call and the shoes and the Italian and the bodyguard she did not yet know were bodyguards. She thought about 12 years of a man who had never raised his voice, never missed her birthday, never once made her feel stupid for not knowing something she hadn't been told, and also 12 years of questions she had not asked because she had categorized him as simple and his life as uncomplicated and his love as the small, daily, unglamorous kind that did not require investigation. She got off one stop early by accident, stood on the platform while the train pulled away, walked the extra 6 blocks home in shoes that were slightly wrong for walking, which was a perfect metaphor for several things, and she was too tired to appreciate it. The apartment smelled like garlic and something slow-cooked. Lucien was in the kitchen. He had changed out of the good shoes and the serious shirt. He was in the soft clothes she recognized, the ones with the small fraying at the left cuff that she had been meaning to mend for 2 years. And he was standing at the stove with his back to her, and for one wild, disorienting second she wanted to pretend the entire previous 24 hours had not happened. She set her bag down. "Someone called me today," she said. "From an unknown number, a man. He said you asked him to call me so I wouldn't be frightened." Lucien turned off the burner. He did not turn around immediately. She watched his shoulders, the way they settled, like something was being set down. Then he turned. "Come sit down," he said. "I don't want to sit down." "Naomi, who are you?" The question came out smaller than she intended, more exposed. "I mean, I know who you are. I've been married to you for 12 years, but who are you, Lucien? Because something is—" She gestured at the air between them, unable to find the right shape for it. "Something has been wrong, and I have been standing right next to it, and I didn't see it, and I need to understand why." He was quiet for a long moment, in that way of his, and then he crossed the kitchen and pulled out one of the chairs and sat down. Not at the head of the table, but at the side, the ordinary place he always sat. And he put both hands flat on the table, and he looked at her. "You deserve the whole truth," he said. "I've known that for a long time. I kept telling myself you were better off without it. I was protecting you." He paused. "I was also protecting myself. I want to be honest about that." She sat down across from him, not because she'd decided to, but because her legs made the choice. "Then be honest," she said. He looked at his hands. "The business ventures I've never fully explained," he began. "The calls I take in Italian, the men you've occasionally noticed near the building and never asked about because you assumed they were neighborhood. Lucien. I run things, Naomi. I have been running things for a long time, long before I met you. The unemployed husband that Gavin Pierce laughed about last night." His jaw shifted, just slightly. "That man doesn't exist. He has never existed. I let you believe something because I wanted you to love me without the weight of what I am. And that was wrong. That was wrong in a way I have to own completely." The kitchen was very quiet. "What do you run?" she asked. He held her gaze. "Everything," he said. She needed that to be metaphorical. She looked at his face and understood it was not. "How much of our life?" She stopped, started again. "The mortgage on this apartment." "Paid." My mother's hospital bills, 3 years ago. She told me she had some insurance I hadn't. I know what she told you. Naomi put her hand flat on the table. Not to touch him, just to have something solid. The neighborhood, 2 years ago. When the break-in stopped overnight, everyone thought the alderman had finally. The alderman had nothing to do with it. She sat with that. The kitchen smelled like garlic and slow-cooked meat, and 12 years of things she had not known to look for. Gavin Pierce, she said finally. Something moved across Lucian's face. Something controlled but not quite gone. What about him? He said. He didn't just humiliate you last night, did he? She wasn't asking. He's been at this longer than last night. Lucian was still for a moment. Costa sent me a file this morning. Gavin has been systematically redirecting the credit for your work for 2 years. He has also... He stopped. Chose the next words. He has also had conversations with 3 board members in which he made specific recommendations about your future at the company. Conversations that included your appearance, your weight, the suggestion that a woman in your position creates a certain optics problem for Hawthorne's brand going forward. The heat that moved through Naomi then was not grief. It was something older and harder than grief. He said that. In writing, to the board. She breathed in, breathed out. And you have that. I have everything, Lucian said. She looked at her husband, at the man she had driven to work events and introduced as her quiet partner, and laughed alongside a room of strangers to protect her own comfort in a place that had been using her and discarding her for years. And she felt something rearrange itself inside her chest. Not warmth, something more serious than warmth. What are you going to do? She asked. He looked at her steadily. That depends, he said, on what you want me to do. She held his gaze for a long time. Outside, the city made its ordinary noises. Traffic, wind off the lake, someone's music from a floor below. The city that she had been told she was safe in. The city that her husband had been quietly operating inside like a second, invisible architecture beneath the visible one. What are my options? She asked. And Lucien opened his mouth to answer, and his phone lit up on the table between them. Lit up and stayed lit, buzzing with the specific short pulse that she would later learn meant something had moved from the planning stage to the happening stage, that somewhere in Chicago, the first pieces of something large and irreversible had just been set into motion. And everything they were about to say to each other became, in that instant, moot, because it had already begun. Lucian picked up the phone. He did not say hello. He listened for 4 seconds, maybe 5, with the phone pressed flat against his ear and his eyes on the middle distance. Not on Naomi, not on the table, not on anything in the room, on something interior, something being rapidly recalculated. Then he said, in English, which surprised her, "How many?" A pause. "Where is Costa now?" Another pause, shorter. "Don't move him. I'm coming. I'm..." He set the phone down and stood up in one motion, and the man who had been sitting across from her with his hands flat on the table and his voice low and careful was still technically present. Same face, same hands, same fraying cuff, but something had shifted in the way he occupied the room. The space around him felt different, pressurized. "I have to go," he said. "Lucien, I know we weren't finished." He was already moving toward the hallway, toward the coat closet, with a precision of movement that told her this was not new, this was practiced. A man who had left rooms like this before, cleanly and without wasted motion. "Lock the door after I leave. Don't answer anything you don't recognize." "You were just about to tell me everything." "And I will. That hasn't changed." He stopped at the closet and took out a coat she had not seen before. Dark, good fabric. But something has moved faster than it should have, and I need to deal with it before it becomes something I can't manage from this kitchen. "What moved? What does that mean? Something moved." He turned and looked at her then, fully, the way he'd looked at her on the balcony that morning, with that weight she still didn't have a name for. "It means Gavin Pierce is not as stupid as he looks, and it means someone in my circle told him things they should not have known to tell." The word landed in the room with a specific gravity. "A leak," she said. "Yes." "In your..." She gestured because she still didn't have the vocabulary for what she was gesturing at. His organization, his empire, his second architecture beneath the visible city. Your people. Yes. And that's dangerous. He looked at her with something that was almost, not quite, but almost an expression of relief. As if she had asked exactly the right question, and he had been waiting a long time for her to be the person who would. Very, he said. Then he was gone, and the door clicked shut behind him, and Naomi sat alone in a kitchen that smelled like a dinner they had not eaten and listened to the sound of her own breathing and tried to hold the shape of what her life had just become. She did not sleep. She sat on the couch with her knees pulled up and her phone in her hand, and her mind moving through every memory she had of their life together, applying the new information like a filter, watching things change color under it. The mortgage, paid. Her mother's debts, erased. The neighborhood, quiet after years of not being quiet. The strangers outside the building she had cataloged as neighborhood men, as parked cars, as nothing. She thought about the night 2 years ago when a man had followed her from the train station and then simply stopped, mid-block, and turned around and walked the other way. She had thought she'd imagined the threat. She had not. She had also not imagined the intervention, which had just arrived without her seeing it, the way everything Lucien did arrived, present and invisible at the same time. She thought about the fact that she had laughed, in that ballroom, with 400 people and a microphone and a man who had apparently been systematically dismantling her career with board-level precision. She had laughed along with the joke about her husband, and she had done it to protect her standing in a company that had already decided she was disposable. The humiliation of that was a specific temperature. She sat inside it for a long time. Her phone showed 1:14 a.m. when it rang. Lucien. I'm okay, he said before she could speak. I'm going to be a few hours. Don't wait up. Tell me what happened. A breath on the line. Behind it, she could hear other voices, distant and low. The sound of a room with people in it who were working. One of my senior men, a man named Ricci, who has been with me for 11 years, passed information to Gavin Pierce's financial people approximately 6 weeks ago. Specifically, he passed the details of the controlling interest structure, the ownership of Hawthorne through the investment layers. He told Gavin that you own the company. Yes. Why? A pause. Ricci was offered something he believed I couldn't offer him. A position. A piece of something separate. Gavin Pierce has been building a relationship with a rival operation out of New York for the better part of a year, and Ricci decided his future was better served there. So Gavin knows, she said slowly. He knew last night, at the gala. He knew he was mocking the man who owns his company. Which means the public humiliation was not accidental. She felt the cold move through her again, but different this time. Not the cold of being embarrassed, the cold of understanding that the thing you witnessed was something far more calculated than it appeared. He was provoking you, she said. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to move first, publicly, emotionally. He wanted me to reveal what I am before I was ready, so that the board, who he has been preparing for the past 6 weeks with Ricci's information, would have grounds to challenge the ownership structure. He has attorneys who have been building a case that my acquisition of the controlling interest was fraudulent. If I had reacted last night, he would have had exactly what he needed. And instead you sat still. I sat still. She was quiet for a moment. She thought about his hands, flat on the table. She thought about the one look he had given Gavin Pierce, just one, and then his eyes dropping to his hands. Lucien, she said, he's going to move now anyway, isn't he? He knows you know about Ricci. A silence that was its own answer. Get some rest if you can, he said. I'm not sleeping. I know, but try. He was gone again. She did not try. At 3 a.m, she made coffee and stood in the kitchen drinking it and thought about the specific texture of a betrayal that had been 11 years in the making. Because that was what Ricci was, she understood now. Not a man who had been corrupted recently, a man who had been patient, a man who had sat next to Lucien for 11 years and learned everything there was to learn and waited for the right buyer. She thought about all the things she had not known, not just about Lucien's world, but about her own. About Gavin Pierce presenting her expansion work as a shared strategy to the board, about the specific language he had used regarding her appearance, her weight, the optics of a woman who looked like her representing Hawthorne at the executive level. She tried to hold the full shape of that contempt, the careful, systematic, documented contempt of a man she had eaten catered shrimp next to at quarterly meetings, and found she couldn't quite make her mind stay on it without a heat building behind her eyes that she refused to release. She would not cry about Gavin Pierce. She had decided that sometime around 2 a.m., and she intended to honor it. What she would do instead was think. She pulled out her laptop and opened the encrypted drive where she had saved the Midwest expansion files, all 11 months of them. She began at the beginning and she read through them methodically, not for content. She knew the content, she had written every word, but for the timestamps, the version history, the trail of who had accessed what and when. Hawthorne's document system retained access logs for 18 months, something almost no one on the team thought about because it was buried in the IT compliance documentation that only Naomi had ever read completely. What she found in those logs, cross-referenced with dates she now knew meant something. The dates of board meetings, the dates of Gavin's conversations with the 3 board members that Lucian's man Costa had documented, was a pattern. Specific documents accessed by Gavin's login at hours when Gavin was not in the office, accessed and, in 2 cases, printed. To a printer registered to an IP address she didn't recognize. An outside printer, an outside location. He had been physically removing her work. She sat with that for a moment. Then she opened a new document and began building a timeline. She was not a Mafia consigliere. She was a logistics operations manager who had spent 9 years learning how systems worked and where they failed and how to reconstruct a chain of events from the data trails they left behind. She was in her own domain precisely as dangerous as Lucian was in his. She had simply never had occasion to use that skill against someone. The occasion had arrived. Lucien came home at 6:40 in the morning. She heard the door and looked up from the laptop, and he stood in the hallway looking at her with his coat still on and the particular look of a man who had been awake all night, making decisions he couldn't unmake. He looked at the laptop, at the documents open across the screen, at the handwritten notes she had made on the back of an envelope, because she had not been able to find a notepad and had not wanted to stop. "What is that?" he said. "Access logs from Hawthorne's document management system," she said, cross-referenced with your man Costa's timeline of Gavin's board communications. "Lucien, he didn't just take my work. He printed specific strategic documents to an off-site location. If those documents went to his New York contacts—" "They did," Lucien said. He came into the room and sat heavily in the armchair across from the couch. He had not taken off his coat. "Costa confirmed it 40 minutes ago. Gavin passed Hawthorne's entire Midwest expansion strategy to a competitor logistics firm out of Newark called Veridon Partners. They've been using it to build a parallel operation for 6 months. Naomi closed her laptop slowly. "He stole it." "Yes. He stole my work and sold it to a competitor." "Yes." She breathed in. "Can you prove it?" "We can prove it 7 different ways," Lucien said, "but that is not the problem we have right now." Something in his voice. She looked at him more carefully. He was tired, genuinely, heavily tired in a way she had rarely seen, and underneath the tiredness was something else, something pulled tight. "What is the problem you have right now?" she asked. He looked at her. Ricci didn't just sell Gavin the ownership structure information. Before we found him tonight, he had already made one more transmission, to Gavin's attorneys. "The names," he said. "Naomi. The names of every judge, every city official, every financial institution that has worked with my operation over the past 15 years. The air in the room changed. "If those names go public," she started, "they won't just go public. Gavin's attorneys will package them as a corruption expose and deliver them to the federal prosecutor's office in the Northern District, simultaneously." He rubbed his face with one hand, a gesture so ordinary and exhausted and human that it knocked something loose in her chest. "The play isn't to expose me in the press. The play is to trigger a federal investigation that freezes every asset connected to my name, including the Hawthorne shares, before I can use them to remove him." She understood it completely. The elegance of it, in the terrible way that a trap can be elegant when it's been built by someone who has studied their target with real patience. He's been planning this since before the gala, she said. Probably before last winter. He used Ricci. He found Ricci, or Ricci found him. It doesn't matter which now. He leaned forward, forearms on his knees. What matters is the transmission happened 3 hours ago. We intercepted a copy, but we do not know if it was the only copy. We do not know if it's already in federal hands. Naomi uncurled from the couch. She stood up and walked to the window and looked at Chicago, which was doing what Chicago does at 6:40 in the morning, going gray and pink at the same time, indifferent to the specific crisis happening in one apartment above its traffic. How long do you have? She said. If it's already filed, 72 hours before a freeze order hits the accounts. If it hasn't been filed yet, we have until Gavin makes that call, which he will make the moment he understands we've found Ricci. Has he understood that yet? He will by 9 o'clock. The man is careful. He'll have a notification system. She turned from the window. Then we have until 9 o'clock to change the shape of this, she said. Lucien looked at her steadily. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Gavin Pierce stole my work and used it to build a case against my husband, and I have 11 months of documented evidence of that theft sitting on an encrypted drive right here. She picked up the laptop. I'm thinking that the federal prosecutor's office in the Northern District of Illinois would be very interested in receiving, before 9 o'clock this morning, a comprehensive package documenting corporate espionage, stolen trade secrets, fraudulent misappropriation of intellectual property, and the transmission of proprietary strategic materials to a competing firm. She looked at him. With your financial people, you can tie Veridon Partners to Gavin, can't you? A slow beat. Yes, he said. Can you prove the money trail? What he was paid? We already have it. Then give it to me, all of it, and let me build the filing. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen before on his face, which was remarkable given 12 years, and she couldn't immediately name it. Not surprise, not admiration. Something more specific than either of those. The expression of a man who has been very good at protecting someone and has just understood for the first time that the someone did not need quite as much protecting as he had assumed. Naomi, Lucien, he stole from me. He stole my work and my name and my career advancement, and then he used what he stole to try to put you in a federal prison. Her voice was level, completely level. I am a logistics operations manager. I build systems. I document chains of evidence. I find the places where the supply chain breaks down, and I close them. She set the laptop on the table between them. This is a supply chain, and I know exactly where it breaks down. He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the city was getting lighter. Costa can have the financial documentation to you in 20 minutes, he said. Then call him. He called him. What happened in the next 2 hours was not elegant. It was not the kind of thing that gets described in terms of power or precision or the quiet authority of a man in a good suit walking into a room. It was Naomi Brooks in day-old clothes with cold coffee at her elbow, building a federal disclosure package from scratch at her kitchen table while Lucy Yen sat across from her feeding her documentation, financial records, wire transfer logs, digital transmission metadata, that arrived in encrypted files via a man named Costa, who she had still never met, but whose organizational skills she was beginning to genuinely respect. She worked the way she had always worked, which was fast and without wasted motion, and with the particular focus that descends on people who have stopped being afraid because they have found something useful to do with the fear. Lucien watched her. He answered her questions. And she had many, and they were specific and technical, and occasionally required him to make additional calls to extract additional information. And he brought her a second coffee without being asked. And at some point around 8:15 he said quietly, with his eyes on the papers in front of her, I spent 12 years trying to keep this world away from you. I know, she said, without looking up. I thought that was love. She did look up then. It was, she said. It was also a little bit of something else, wasn't it? He was quiet. You wanted to be the one who handled things, she said. Not accusatory, just exact. You wanted to be the protection, the invisible hand, the thing that solved problems before they arrived. And that's love, Lucien, genuinely, I understand that. But it also meant that for 12 years I was living in a house where I didn't know the walls. He held her gaze and did not deflect and did not explain himself further, which was the correct response, and she respected him for it. The walls are visible now, he said. Yes, she said. They are. She went back to work. At 8:51, 9 minutes before Lucian's estimated window, she transmitted the completed package. 47 pages of documented evidence, time-stamped, cross-referenced, with a cover letter that was 3 paragraphs and said exactly what it needed to say, and nothing else. To the Office of the Federal Prosecutor for the Northern District of Illinois, with simultaneous copies to the SEC's Chicago Regional Office and the Illinois Attorney General's Commercial Fraud Division. She sat back. Her hands were shaking. She noticed that. Small tremors, the kind that arrive after the focus releases and the body remembers it has been running on adrenaline and old coffee for the past 3 hours. Lucien's phone lit up. He looked at it. "That's Costa," he said. "Gavin Pierce just sent a message to his attorneys. He knows we found Ricci." "Then he's about to make the call," she said. "Yes." She looked at her husband across the kitchen table with the empty coffee cup between them and the laptop with its sent confirmation on the screen and the early morning light coming through the window. "Will what I sent be enough?" she asked. "To get ahead of what he's sending?" Lucy looked at her for a moment, and then something moved across his face that she had not seen in a very long time, not since the early years when everything was still being discovered. A warmth underneath the gravity that she had missed without knowing she had missed it. "It'll be enough," he said. His phone lit up again. And this time, when he looked at the screen, the warmth vanished and what replaced it was something else entirely, something cold and immediate and without any ambiguity whatsoever. He turned the phone to show her the screen. It was a photograph. Taken from outside a building she recognized, her sister Dana's apartment building in Logan Square. Taken in the last 30 minutes, based on the light. Dina was visible in the frame, coming out of the building's front door with her coat half on, oblivious to the camera. Underneath the photograph was a message in plain text. "You moved first, so will I. Tell your wife to decide what matters more, the evidence she just sent or the people she still has." Naomi looked at the photograph of her sister, at Dina's coat half on, her head down against the morning wind, at the fact that whoever had taken this photo had been close enough to have done something else entirely and had chosen, for the moment, not to. The trembling in her hands stopped. Something harder replaced it. She looked up at Lucien and found him already on his feet, already on the phone, already issuing instructions in a voice she had not heard before, not loud, not angry, but carrying an absolute, immovable authority that moved through the air like a change in air pressure, something you felt in your chest before you understood it with your mind. He was not the quiet man who drove her to work. He had never been that man. And now, looking at the photograph of her sister and the threat underneath it, Naomi understood that the question was no longer what Lucien was capable of, or what his world was made of, or how deep the walls of their life together really went. The question was what she was capable of, and she was finding out the answer right now, in this kitchen, in this light, with her hands gone still and her jaw set, and 12 years of a life she had not fully understood, suddenly crystallizing into a single, irreversible point of clarity. They had come after Dina. They had made it personal in a way that could not be walked back. And Naomi Brooks, who had spent 9 years being overlooked and one night laughing at the wrong moment and 12 years not knowing the walls of her own house, Naomi Brooks was done being the person in the room who absorbed things quietly and moved on. She picked up her phone. She called Dina. It rang 4 times, then 5. Then a voice she did not recognize answered and said, in a flat professional tone that was somehow more frightening than any raised voice could have been, "Mrs. Moretti, your sister is fine. She'll stay that way as long as you make a phone call to the prosecutor's office in the next 15 minutes and withdraw what you sent." Naomi held the phone against her ear and breathed once, slowly, and looked at Lucien across the kitchen. Lucien, who had gone completely still again, that terrible stillness, watching her face to read what was on the other end of the line. And she thought about Dina coming out of her building with her coat half on. And she thought about 11 months of work stolen and sold. And she thought about a ballroom full of laughter. And she thought about a man who had loved her from inside an invisible architecture for 12 years and never once let her see the extent of what he was holding back. And she said, into the phone, with a steadiness that surprised even herself, "Put my sister on." A silence. I said put my sister on, now, or the next call I make is not to the prosecutor's office. The silence on the phone lasted 4 seconds. Naomi counted them, not deliberately. Her mind did it on its own, the way minds reach for measurable things when everything else has gone unmeasurable. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then Dina's voice, slightly breathless, with the specific tightness of someone who was working very hard to sound normal. Nay. Hey. Are you hurt? No, there's a man. I'm in my apartment. He came in after me and he's just standing here and he hasn't... A breath. He hasn't done anything. He's just standing here. Okay. Naomi's voice was completely flat. She had made it flat on purpose, the way you flatten a fire by removing the oxygen. I'm going to handle this. Don't argue with him. Don't try to leave. Just stay where you are. Naomi, what is happening? Who is this man? Why does he know your name? I will explain everything. I promise you. Stay where you are. She lowered the phone. Lucien was already across the room, standing close enough that he had heard both sides of the call, and his face was doing the thing she had seen it do twice now in the past 24 hours. That compression, every muscle pulled inward, every ordinary human expression evacuated and replaced with something that was not anger and not fear, and was not, in fact, any emotion she had a ready word for. Pure function, a man who had stopped feeling and started solving. Costa has eyes on the building, he said. It wasn't a question. Then why isn't she... They let her go inside first. They waited. They were trying to create a window I couldn't close quickly. He was already on his phone. Costa, Logan Square, now. A pause. I know, do it faster. He ended the call and looked at Naomi. 3 minutes. She's alone with him for 3 minutes. 2.5 now. Naomi turned and walked to the hallway closet. She opened it and reached past the coats to the back shelf. The shelf she had always assumed held old boxes and a tool set she never used, and her hand found nothing where the boxes should have been. She turned around. Second shelf, Lucien said, without looking up from his phone. Left side. She looked. There was a small gray lockbox she had never noticed, or had noticed and filed as unremarkable, which amounted to the same thing. What's the combination? Your birthday, he said. Month and year. She opened it. Inside was a phone, a black burner, already charged, and a folded piece of paper with 12 names and numbers, and underneath those, in Lucien's handwriting, a single line, in case I'm not reachable. These people answer to you. She stared at that line for a moment. These people answer to you. He had written that before last night, before the gala, before the conversation in the kitchen, before any of this. He had prepared this for her without telling her it existed, which was precisely the problem, and also, she was beginning to understand precisely the love, imperfect, controlling, genuinely meant. She took the paper and the burner phone and went back to the kitchen. First name on this list, she said, holding up the paper. Benedetti. He runs the north side. He already has people in Logan Square from last night's deployment. Then why do we need Costa's team? Lucien looked at her. We don't. Call Benedetti. She called Benedetti. He answered on the second ring with a single word. Mrs. Moretti. Not a greeting. A confirmation. She was who he had been told to expect. My sister is in her apartment at 2847 West Armitage. There is a man inside with her. I need him removed. Now. Already moving, Benedetti said. 90 seconds. He ended the call. Naomi set the burner phone on the table and looked at her hands, still not shaking. That was something. That was maybe the only thing she was sure of right now, that her hands were still and her mind was still, and somewhere in Logan Square, her sister was standing in her apartment with a man who was there because of a choice Naomi had made at 8:51 in the morning. That weight was enormous. She took it and put it somewhere internal, somewhere she could carry it without it slowing her down. She would deal with its full mass later. Right now it had to be ballast, not anchor. Her other phone rang. The unknown number from yesterday. She answered. The withdrawal, the flat voice said. You have 10. My sister just became unreachable to you, Naomi said. Whatever man you had with her is no longer in a position to receive your instructions, so the 10 minutes you were about to give me are no longer a currency you possess." She paused. "I'd like to speak to Gavin Pierce." A longer silence. "I'd like to speak to him directly," she said. "Not through intermediaries. Tell him Naomi Brooks would like 5 minutes. Tell him she's offering him something he will want." The line went quiet. Not dead, held. And she could hear the specific quality of a muted conversation happening somewhere on the other end, which meant the flat-voiced man was not Gavin, was a layer below Gavin, and was now having to decide how to present this upward. Lucien was watching her with his arms crossed and his shoulder against the kitchen door frame. "You're offering him something?" he said quietly. "I'm offering him the impression of something." A beat. "You're buying time," he said. "I'm buying 12 minutes, she said. Which is how long Costa said it would take to get your attorney, Marcus Vell, physically present at the prosecutor's office with the supplementary documentation Costa was compiling this morning. Lucien was still for a moment. "You knew about the supplementary. Costa mentioned it at 6:40. You were on the other phone. I was listening." She looked at him steadily. "Is 12 minutes enough?" He looked at her for a moment with that expression she still didn't have a name for, and then he took out his own phone and called Costa and said, "How long?" He listened. "Make it 10. He ended the call. 10 minutes, he said. "Vella needs 10. "Then I need 10. The held line clicked back on. The flat voice said, "Mr. Pierce will speak with you. 1 moment." Gavin Pierce's voice, when it came, had lost the gala ease. The smooth, room-reading warmth that he wore like a second suit had peeled back just enough to show what was underneath it, which was a man who was tightly controlled and currently working very hard at remaining so. "Naomi," he said. Not Brooks. Not Mrs. Moretti. Her first name deployed like a hand extended, like an invitation to be reasonable. "Gavin," she said. Same register, same tone. "I think we've gotten ourselves into a situation that neither of us—" "I'm going to stop you there," she said. "I didn't call to negotiate. I called to make you a single offer, which you can accept or not." A pause. "Go ahead." "You have documentation from Ricci about Lucien's ownership structure and his network. You were planning to transmit it to the federal prosecutor to trigger an asset freeze before Lucien could act through Hawthorne's board structure." She kept her voice even. "I know you've already drafted the submission. I know your attorney's name is Felix Corda, and I know he works out of an office on West Monroe." A silence that was very different from the previous silences. This one had a texture to it, the texture of a man recalibrating. "What I'm offering you," she continued, "is the following. Withdraw the Ricci documentation. Resign from Hawthorne today, effective immediately, with a standard separation agreement. Walk away from the Veridon relationship and return the proprietary materials you transmitted to them. In exchange, the filing I sent this morning is amended to remove you as a named respondent, and you are given 60 days to make restitution on the Veridon materials before the amended filing proceeds." A long breath on the line. She could hear him thinking, which was a strange sensation, the sound of intelligence being applied to self-preservation in real time. "That's a very structured offer," he said, "for someone whose husband is about to have every asset frozen by federal order." "My husband's assets are not frozen yet," she said, "and whether they ever are depends on a phone call Felix Corda has not made yet, which means we are both, right now, standing on the same side of an action that hasn't happened. You're assuming I care about staying out of your amended filing. I'm assuming you care about the 3 board members whose names are also in my filing, the ones you involved in conversations about my appearance and my career prospects. Those conversations were recorded, Gavin." A beat. She had not known for certain that they were recorded. She was making a structural argument, not a factual one. Corporate discrimination liability at the board level is not the same as a business dispute. It doesn't go away with a separation agreement. It goes to jury trial. Another silence. Lucien had moved. He was standing directly across from her now, on the other side of the table, watching her face the way people watch a high-wire act. Not wanting to distract, not wanting to look away. She held up 4 fingers. 4 minutes. He nodded. His jaw was tight. I need time to discuss this with my attorney, Gavin said. You have 3 minutes. That's not that. 3 minutes, Gavin. The offer doesn't improve with time. She checked the clock on the microwave. Starting now. She put the phone on the table, face up, and exhaled once through her nose and looked at the ceiling for precisely 2 seconds, which was all the time she could afford to spend on the physical reality of what her nervous system was doing, which was running on fumes and fear and the specific kind of electric clarity that comes when you have nothing left to protect except the people you love and you have decided that is enough. Lucienne said very quietly, "You were magnificent." "Not yet," she said. "Ask me in 3 minutes." At 2 minutes and 40 seconds, Gavin Pierce came back on the line. "I need 48 hours to arrange the Veridon return," he said. "The materials are distributed across 24 hours," she said, "and I need Corda to call the prosecutor's office in the next 30 minutes to confirm the Ricci submission is being held. Not withdrawn. Held. If it goes in before Corda makes that call, the offer is void, and I add the fraud documentation from Veridon's end directly to the original filing." She paused. "Do you understand the terms?" A pause that lasted long enough to be its own answer. "Yes," Gavin Pierce said. His voice had gone flat. The warmth was entirely gone now. What was left was the voice of a man who had played a complex game, played it with real skill, and was in the process of discovering that someone had been playing a different game on the same board and had not announced it. "Corda calls in 30 minutes, she said. "I'll be waiting." She ended the call. Her legs gave slightly. Not much. A degree of softening in the knees that she controlled by putting her hand on the table edge. Just for a moment. Just the body reclaiming its right to acknowledge what the mind had been suppressing. Lucienne came around the table. He did not hold her up, which she was grateful for because she did not need holding up, but he stood close enough that she could feel the solid reality of him beside her, and that was different and somehow what she actually needed. "Well?" she said. Lucienne checked his phone. "Filed 7 minutes ago. The supplementary documentation is in." He looked at her. "The freeze order won't move forward, not with what Vel put in front of them." He paused. "Gavin has nothing to send now that outweighs what we've already submitted. He doesn't know that yet." "No." "Good." She straightened up fully, removed her hand from the table, and took a breath that went all the way down. Her other phone buzzed. "Benedetti. Situation resolved. Your sister is fine. She's asking questions I don't know how to answer." Naomi almost smiled. That was Dana, completely. She texted back, "Tell her I'll be there in an hour. Tell her I'll explain everything." She paused over the phone, then added, "Tell her I'm sorry." The hour that followed was not calm. Calm was not a word that applied to anything in the next 60 minutes. But it was the kind of controlled chaos that Naomi had a working relationship with. The kind where the crisis has crested, and what remains is the management of consequences, which was, in the most precise sense, her professional specialty. Costa arrived at the apartment at 9:40 with 2 men she had never seen and a leather satchel that contained, as far as she could understand, a secondary set of documentation that cross-referenced Ricci's transmissions with Gavin's financial receipts from the Veridon account, in a way that built a standalone criminal case independent of any of Lucien's network exposure. It was extraordinarily thorough work, and it had been done between 2 a.m. and 9 a.m. by a man she had never met in a location she didn't know, and she found herself wanting to shake his hand and also ask how he organized his files, because his indexing system was visually clean in a way she respected. She did not do either of those things. She reviewed the satchel contents, confirmed the overlap with her own filing, and told Lucienne which 3 sections were redundant and which 2 added material that strengthened the S.E. Isai component. Lucienne relayed this to Costa with the particular efficiency of a man who had long since stopped being surprised by the capabilities of the people around him, but had clearly not included his wife in that category until approximately the last 4 hours. "She does this every day," Costa said, not quietly enough. "Apparently," Lucienne said. At 10:15, Felix Corda called the prosecutor's office. Naomi's phone showed the confirmation from her contact in that office, a woman named Reyes, a junior prosecutor who had gone to Northwestern 2 years ahead of Naomi's cousin, and had once, at a family barbecue, given Naomi her direct number for reasons neither of them had fully articulated at the time, but which had just paid off completely. At 10:42. The Ricci submission was being held. The freeze order had not moved. Gavin Pierce's play had stalled. At 11:30, Naomi sat in the back seat of one of Lucienne's cars. She had asked for a driver, which was a sentence she could not quite believe she had said with a straight face, and yet here they were, heading toward Logan Square to see her sister. Lucienne was beside her. He had finally taken off the coat from this morning. Outside, Chicago was doing its mid-morning thing. People on sidewalks with coffee, delivery vehicles double parked, a woman pushing a stroller with the specific focused energy of someone who had somewhere to be. "What happens now?" Naomi said. "With the company. Hawthorne." He leaned back against the seat. "The board will convene an emergency meeting. Now that Vell's filing is in, the controlling interest documentation becomes public record within 10 days. The board will know what they're dealing with. How many of them knew before? 2. The other 5 are going to be furious and frightened in roughly equal measure. And Gavin? Gavin will resign, Lucian said. Today, if his attorneys are worth what he pays them. The 24-hour window for Veridon restitution was real, and they know that if he doesn't comply, what gets filed next isn't manageable with a corporate attorney. She watched the city passing. "What I sent this morning," she said. "My filing. The expansion documentation, the access logs, the theft." She paused. "That's separate from your case against him, isn't it?" "Entirely separate. So even if everything with Ricci and the network exposure had gone perfectly for him, even if he'd triggered the freeze order and neutralized you through the assets, he would still be a man who stole your work and sold it to a competitor," Lucian finished. "Yes, that case exists completely independently of me. You built it yourself from your own documentation, and it stands on its own." She turned to look at him. "You realize," she said, "that I'm going to need to know everything now. About all of it. The full structure, the people, the operations, the history." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking to be involved in it. I'm asking to know. Because I am never again going to be standing in a room where someone has information about my life that I don't have." He looked at her. His eyes were tired. His jaw was dark with a morning's worth of not shaving. He looked, in this moment, less like the man with the immaculate black suits and the absolute loyalty of soldiers and judges, and more like someone who had been awake for 36 hours and was in a car with his wife and was very glad to be exactly here. "I know," he said. "I know that." "Do you mean it?" "I've never not meant something I've said to you." She held his gaze for a moment, measuring that. Then she looked forward again. "She's going to be so angry," Naomi said, meaning Dina. "Yes. She's going to want to know everything at once, and she's going to interrupt every explanation, and she's going to cry and then tell me she's not crying." "Sounds right." "And then she's going to ask if you're actually in the Mafia, and I'm going to have to answer that." A beat. "What are you going to say?" Lucienne asked. She looked at him sideways. "I haven't decided yet," she said. "I'll figure it out when I'm sitting across from her." A pause. "I'm good at figuring things out in real time, apparently." The car moved through Logan Square. The building came into view. Dina's building, red brick, a coffee shop on the ground floor. Naomi saw Benedetti's man on the corner, half turned away, visible only if you knew what you were looking for. Yesterday, she would not have known what she was looking for. She was learning fast. The car stopped. She reached for the door handle and Lucien's hand closed briefly, lightly, around her wrist. Not to stop her, just to make contact. She looked at him. "Whatever Dina asks," he said, "tell her the truth. About all of it. She deserves it." "I know she does." "So did you," he said, "from the beginning." She looked at him for a moment. At the weight of that statement and everything it acknowledged, the years of it, the cost of it, and she nodded once. Then she went inside. Dina was standing in the middle of her living room when Naomi walked in, arms crossed, eyes red at the edges, but chin up in the particular posture that meant she had been crying, and was now done with that and had moved on to the part where she needed answers. She was wearing pajama pants and an old college sweatshirt, and she looked at her sister with an expression that was anger and relief and more questions than could be asked in a single breath. "Naomi," she said. "Dina." "There was a man in my apartment." "I know." "He stood there for 6 minutes without speaking, and then 3 other men came in, and the first man left, and the 3 new men told me I was safe, and then I was alone." Her voice was completely even. "What is happening?" Naomi sat down on Dina's couch. She put her hands on her knees. "Sit down," she said. "It's a long story." Dina sat, and Naomi told her. All of it. In the order it had happened, without softening it and without leaving anything out. Because Lucien was right. Dina deserved it, and so did she. And the time for partial truths and careful omissions and things left unexamined because they were easier that way was over. It was over in the ballroom 2 nights ago when she laughed. It was over on the balcony when she noticed the shoes. It was over in the kitchen when the phone lit up and everything that had already begun completed its beginning. She talked for 40 minutes. Dina did not interrupt, which was unprecedented, and meant she was absorbing something she understood was bigger than the interruption she usually had. When Naomi finished, Dina was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So your husband owns the company you work for?" "Yes." "And he's—" Dina paused. "He runs things?" "Yes." "What kind of things?" Naomi looked at her sister. "Everything," she said. Dina absorbed that, looked at the coffee table, looked back. "And you didn't know." "I didn't know," Naomi said. "I thought I married a quiet man who didn't have much ambition. I thought I was the one holding us up." She paused. "I was wrong about almost everything, including what holding someone up actually looks like." Dina was quiet again. Then she said very quietly, "Did you know he paid off Mama's hospital bills?" Naomi met her sister's eyes. "I found out last night," she said. Dina's chin moved, just slightly, the particular movement of someone who is deciding, again, not to cry. "Okay," she said after a moment. "Okay." She breathed out. "What do you need from me?" It was such a Dina thing to say. Not what do I do with this information, or how do I process what just happened to me? What do you need? That direct, immediate pivot to usefulness that Naomi had been relying on her whole life without ever quite saying so. "I need you to be somewhere safe for the next 24 hours, Naomi said. "After that, Gavin Pierce is going to be a man with significantly fewer resources and significantly less incentive to—" "I can stay here," Dina said. "Benedetti's man is outside." "Good." Dina reached forward and picked up the cold cup of tea on her coffee table. She had apparently made it sometime during the 6 minutes she stood alone with a man she didn't know. "I want to meet this Costa sometime," she said. "He sounds organized." "He is," Naomi said. "I like organized people." "I know you do." They sat there for a moment. Sisters in a living room in Logan Square with morning light coming through the windows and the city going about its business outside, and the specific, complicated weight of a life that had just changed shape entirely settling over both of them. Naomi's phone buzzed. She looked at it. "Lucien. Board meeting called for 3 p.m. Vel needs you present. Your documentation is now the primary exhibit. Prosecutorial interest confirmed they're moving against Gavin independently based on what you filed." She read it twice. Her documentation, primary exhibit. Moving against Gavin independently. She had filed it as leverage, as a 10-minute delay tactic, as the only tool she had available at 8:51 in the morning in her kitchen with cold coffee and shaking hands and 11 months of time-stamped evidence. It had become something else. She texted back, "I'll be there." She looked up at Dina. "I have to go." "Of course you do," Dina said, not sarcastically, just accurately. Naomi stood. She leaned down and held her sister briefly. That specific, wordless hold that sisters have, the one that contains everything that can't be said quickly and doesn't need to be. Then she straightened up and went back to the car. Lucien looked at her when she got in. He read her face the way he always had, with that complete, unhurried attention. "Board meeting," she said. "Board meeting," he confirmed. 3 o'clock. "Yes." She looked at the street outside the window. 12 hours ago, she had been sitting at a kitchen table not eating toast and not understanding anything. Now she was a primary exhibit, and a board meeting, and a federal filing, and a sister who had been frightened and was going to be fine, and a husband. She was beginning, genuinely and without illusion, to see for the first time. "I need to go home," she said. "Change. Eat something." "I had the driver pick up food." She looked. On the seat beside her, a brown bag from the place on Clark Street she had been going to for 6 years. She opened the bag. Turkey on whole wheat, no mayo, extra mustard. The exact thing she ordered every time. She looked at him. "You've always known," she said. Not about the sandwich, about everything, all of it. The full shape of her, the full weight and substance of her, seen and held and accounted for across 12 years while she walked around assuming she was invisible. "Yes," he said, simply. She took a bite of the sandwich because her body had remembered it was starving and looked out the window and breathed and let the city move past while the car headed home and the clock moved toward 3 o'clock and the thing that was coming. The board meeting, the confrontation, the full and final reckoning with everything Gavin Pierce had built and everything he had stolen, gathered itself like a wave at the moment before it breaks, when it is tallest and most complete and has not yet decided what it will remake when it reaches the shore. She got home at 12:43, ate the rest of the sandwich standing over the kitchen sink, and stood in the shower for 4 minutes because that was all the time she could afford, and her body needed at least that much to remember what normal felt like. Normal did not come back. Something else came instead, a steadiness that was different from calm, more deliberate than calm, the kind of steadiness that gets built in the hours after you have done something you did not know you were capable of, and your body is still processing the fact that you did it and survived. She stood in front of her closet. The burgundy dress was still there on its hanger. She moved past it and took out a charcoal blazer and dark trousers she had bought 2 years ago for a conference she had presented at, a conference where she had done all the substantive work and been introduced as part of the Hawthorne team by Gavin Pierce, who had taken the keynote slot. She had sat in the third row and watched him use her research, and she had told herself it was fine. It was how things worked. The important thing was that the work was good. She had been wrong about what the important thing was. She dressed carefully, not slowly. She did not have time for slow, but carefully, the way you dress when you understand that what you wear into a room is not vanity, but armor, and armor should fit correctly. Lucien was in the hallway when she came out. He had also changed. The black suit, immaculate, the one she had never seen before the gala, and now understood was not for galas. He was on the phone speaking in Italian, low and fast, and he looked at her when she appeared, and whatever he saw in her face made him end the call in mid-sentence. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. They left together. Hawthorne Logistics occupied its floors in a glass building on Michigan Avenue, and at 2:47 in the afternoon that building looked exactly as it always had. Lobby fountain, security desk, the elevator banks with their brushed steel doors, except that when Naomi walked in beside Lucien, she counted, without trying to, 7 men in the lobby who were not Hawthorne employees and were not pretending to be. They were simply present, placed, watching the doors and the elevator banks and each other with the calibrated awareness of people whose job was spatial. The security guard at the front desk, a man named Dale, who had worked the lobby for 5 years and always asked Naomi how her weekend was, looked at Lucien and then looked at the men in the lobby and then looked back at Naomi with an expression that was trying very hard to be professional. "Morning, Dale," she said. "Afternoon, Ms. Brooks," he said, and handed her a visitor badge before she asked, which he had never done before, and she understood that instructions had been given in advance. She did not correct him to her usual badge. She put the visitor badge in her pocket and went to the elevators. In the elevator, Lucien said, "The 5 board members who were not in Gavin's circle have been briefed by Vel. They have copies of the ownership documentation and your filing. 2 of them have already spoken to their own attorneys." Frightened? Appropriately. And the 2 who were in Gavin's circle? Marcus Teal and Linda Forsyth. He looked at the elevator doors. "They're in the room. Have they heard from Gavin?" This morning, he would have been asking for their support to challenge the ownership structure in the meeting, offering them cover. He paused. They won't give it to him. Not now that Vel's filing is public record. They're going to try to distance themselves. Publicly, yes. In the meeting itself, they'll be quiet and vote with the majority. So they're cowards, she said. Yes. The elevator opened on the 14th floor. The Hawthorne boardroom was a long room with a view of the lake that on clear days was genuinely beautiful, and today was gray and flat and looked like a held breath. The table seated 14. 7 board members were present. Vel was there. A compact man in his 60s with reading glasses pushed up on his head and a file in front of him that was 3 inches thick and very precisely organized. 2 people she didn't know, attorneys by the look of them, sat against the wall. And at the far end of the table, looking like a man who had not slept and had spent the morning being advised by attorneys and had arrived here anyway because he had decided that presence was still his best card, was Gavin Pierce. He had not resigned yet. That told her something. She had thought he would take the offer and go. She had underestimated, or rather she had correctly estimated his intelligence and underestimated his ego, which in men like Gavin Pierce were 2 entirely different instruments that frequently gave conflicting readings. He looked at her when she came in, then at Lucien. His jaw was tight. The silver hair was slightly less perfect than usual. His eyes moved over Lucien's suit and then over the men who had come into the room behind them, Costa and 2 others she didn't know, and something moved in Gavin's expression that was not fear exactly, but was adjacent to fear, the thing that sits next to fear in people who are too proud to let fear fully land. Mr. Moretti, said one of the board members, Gerald Huang, whom Naomi had met at every quarterly meeting for 4 years, and who had always been pleasant and slightly ineffectual, and was currently sitting very straight. Thank you for coming. I own 43% of this company, Lucien said, without heat, pulling out a chair and sitting down. I'm not a guest. Gerald Huang nodded carefully. Of course. Naomi sat beside Lucien. She set her laptop on the table and opened it and did not look at Gavin Pierce. Vel began. He was a methodical man, and he spoke like one. No drama, no theater, just the sequential presentation of facts in the order they needed to be understood to build the full structure. The ownership documentation, the history of the investment vehicles, the legal validity of the controlling interest, which 3 separate attorneys from 3 separate firms had reviewed and found unimpeachable. He laid it out the way you lay out a foundation, not for argument, but as the thing everything else would stand on. When he was done, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Gavin said, "There are questions about the source of those investment funds that have not been adequately addressed." His voice was controlled. She would give him that. It was the voice of a man who had prepared what he was going to say and was going to say it regardless of the room, because the alternative was silence, and silence was the one thing he could not afford right now. Lucien looked at him. He did not answer immediately. The source of the investment funds, Lucien said, is documented in Exhibit 4 of Mr. Vel's filing, 17 years of tax returns, audited financials, and registered corporate instruments. You're welcome to specify which page you'd like to dispute. I'm not disputing a page. I'm raising a broader concern about the nature— Gavin, Naomi said it quietly. He looked at her. She had not looked directly at him since she walked into the room. She looked at him now, fully, with the complete steady attention of someone who has stopped managing their own discomfort. The access logs from Hawthorne's document management system are in front of every board member in this room, she said. Exhibit 7, your login, the print jobs, the dates and times cross-referenced with the Veridon Partners receivable records that document what you were paid for the materials you removed. She paused. This is not a broader concern about investment sources. This is corporate theft and industrial espionage, and it has your name on every page. The room was very quiet. Linda Forsyth, at the far end, was looking at the table in front of her with the careful attention of someone who was reviewing something extremely interesting on a blank surface. Those documents, Gavin began. Felix Corda called the prosecutor's office at 10:42 this morning to hold the Ricci submission, Naomi said, in exchange for a 24-hour window that you agreed to. You agreed to resign today. You agreed to initiate the Veridon restitution. She looked at him steadily. You came to this meeting instead, which tells me you decided somewhere between 10:42 and now that you still had a play. A beat. You don't, she said. The room was so quiet she could hear Gerald Huang breathing. Gavin Pierce looked at Naomi Brooks for a long moment. It was a different look than the one he had given her at the gala. That look had contained dismissal and performance and the comfortable cruelty of a man who has never faced real cost. This look contained something else, the beginning of an understanding that the woman across this table had built the case that was going to end his career and had done it in a kitchen before 9 in the morning while he was arranging a photograph of her sister. It was not admiration, it was not respect, but it was recognition, and sometimes that has to be enough. "I'll need the weekend," he said, "for the Veridon materials." "You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow," she said. That was the modified term when you accepted the call. The weekend was never on offer. His attorney, who had been sitting against the wall in the kind of deliberate stillness that good attorneys cultivate for exactly these moments, leaned forward and murmured something to Gavin. Gavin listened. His jaw worked once. Then he looked at Vel. "What are the terms of the separation agreement?" he said. He was gone by 4:15. Not fired, not perp-walked, not publicly dismantled in a lobby in front of employees with cameras. None of the dramatic architectures of disgrace that the situation might have seemed to call for. He signed the separation agreement in a side room with his attorney and Vel, and walked out through the lobby with his coat over his arm and his phone to his ear and the specific, compressed posture of a man who was holding himself together by force of will and would continue doing so until he was somewhere private. Naomi watched him go from the 14th floor window. She was not glad. That surprised her slightly. She had expected something sharper, something that felt more like justice. What she felt instead was tired, and something else she couldn't name immediately, something like the state of standing at the end of a very long run and understanding that your legs work and the distance is behind you and you are still here. Costa appeared at her elbow. She had been alone at the window, which she had assumed, but apparently the word alone had a somewhat modified meaning in her life now. "Reyes called," he said, meaning the prosecutor. "They're moving forward with the Veridon case independently. Gavin will be contacted by their office next week. The separation agreement doesn't immunize him from criminal liability for the espionage." "I know," she said. "I didn't offer criminal immunity. I offered not to be a named respondent in my civil filing. Those are different things." Costa looked at her. He was a small man, she noticed, now that she was actually looking. Slight, with gray at his temples and eyes that moved with the specific, constant attention of someone who had learned early that overlooking things was expensive. "Yes," he said. "They are." A pause. "You built a very clean case, Mrs. Moretti." "Miss Brooks," she said. He looked at her. "At work?" she said. "I'm Ms. Brooks at work." He nodded. "Ms. Brooks," and withdrew. The board meeting reconvened at 4:30 without Gavin and without his two allies, who had both developed urgent conflicts that required them to leave, which everyone understood and no one said anything about, because the room had reached its limit for difficult conversations, and the practical matters still needed handling. What followed was 2 hours of governance work, the unsexy, necessary labor of restructuring a company's leadership when its executive layer had just been partially removed. Naomi stayed. She had not planned to stay for this part, but Vel asked her a question about the Midwest expansion timeline, and she answered it, and then someone asked a follow-up, and she answered that too, and at some point she was standing at the whiteboard with a marker, rebuilding the operational structure from the point it had been when Gavin hijacked it, and the room was following her. Lucienne sat at the corner of the table and did not say a word for 90 minutes. She did not look at him while she worked. She didn't need to. She could feel him there. The specific weight of his attention, present and undemanding. The way you feel weather changing through a wall. At 6:45, Gerald Huang said, "Ms. Brooks, given the circumstances, given your documentation and the breadth of your operational knowledge here, the board would like to discuss the question of interim operational leadership." She put the cap on the marker. She had not expected this, or rather, she had not let herself expect it, which was a habit built from 9 years of having expectations quietly removed. "That's a conversation for another day," she said. Today was about stabilizing the structure. Leadership succession needs proper process, not a room full of exhausted people at 6:45. Gerald Huang looked slightly abashed. Of course, you're right. I'll have a full operational brief on the expansion status on every board member's desk by Friday, she said. We can discuss leadership structure at the Monday session. Is that workable? It was workable. She closed her laptop. They left at 7. The lobby was quieter now. 3 of Lucien's men remained, placed differently than before, more relaxed, and she was already learning to read those configurations the way she had once learned to read a logistics network as information about the current state of a system. 3 men, relaxed. The situation was managed. Outside, the night had come in off the lake, and it was cold in the particular way Chicago evenings were cold. Efficiently, without apology, the wind finding the gaps in your coat before you had finished putting it on. The car was waiting. Lucien held the door for her and she got in, and he came in beside her and the door closed and the city began to move past the windows. For a while, neither of them spoke. You didn't have to stay for the board session, he said finally. I know. You had already done the necessary thing before the meeting started. The necessary thing and the complete thing aren't always the same, she said. She looked out the window. Gavin was gone, but the company was still broken. Someone had to... She stopped. It's my work, my expansion, my 11 months. I wasn't going to walk out of that room and let someone else explain what I built. Silence. No, Lucien said. I can see that. She looked at him. He was watching the city, his face in profile, the line of his jaw dark in the window light. Tell me about Ricci, she said. He looked at her. Not the operational details. I don't need those. She paused. He was with you 11 years. You trusted him. Yes. Did you see it before Costa found it? A long pause, honest. There were signs I didn't prioritize. Small things. Changes in how he spoke about certain relationships. A pattern of questions that in isolation seemed like diligence. He looked at his hands. I trusted him because trust is either a practice or it's nothing. And I chose to practice it, and I was wrong. That's going to happen again, she said. In whatever you run, people are going to betray you. Yes. And you're going to miss it sometimes. Yes. She looked at him. I'm not saying that to wound you. I'm saying it because I want you to know that I understand it. The missing, the being wrong about someone. She paused. I missed it with Gavin for 2 years, every quarterly meeting. Every time he stopped by my desk and asked about the project with that interested voice, she breathed out. I thought he was curious. I thought that was what curiosity looked like in someone like him. He was good at it, Lucien said. He was. But I also wanted to believe it was real because it was easier. She looked at the ceiling of the car. I wanted to believe that a room that kept undervaluing me was still a room worth being in. And so I chose not to see the things that contradicted that. We're not so different in that, Lucien said quietly. She looked at him. I chose not to see the cost of keeping you at a distance, he said. It was easier to manage, easier to tell myself that protection was the same as honesty. He met her eyes. It wasn't. No, she said. It wasn't. The car moved through the city. They were close to home now. The streets were familiar. The corner store, the dry cleaner, the building on the left where someone always had music going. I want to ask you something, she said, and I want you to answer it completely. All right? 15 years, everything you've done, the debts you paid, the men you protected me from, the infrastructure underneath all of it. She kept his eyes. Do you regret any of it? Not the hiding it. I know you regret that. I mean the thing itself, what you built and what it cost. He was quiet for long enough that she knew he was taking the question seriously, which was what she had asked for. Some of it, he said finally. The early years, the choices that got made when I was young enough to think that power was the only language that would ever be heard. Some of that I would change. He paused. But the protection, the debts paid, the men kept away, the neighborhood. He looked at her. No, I would do all of that exactly the same. The only thing I would change is that I would have told you. She held his gaze. From the beginning, she said. As soon as I knew it was going to be you, he said. As soon as I knew you were the person I was going to spend my life with. I should have told you then. She looked at him for a long moment, at the face she had been looking at for 12 years, and was only now seeing the complete outline of. Not better than she had thought. Not worse. More. More complicated. More costly. More real. Okay, she said. Okay? I'm not saying everything is fine. I'm saying okay. As in, I hear that, and I believe you. She looked out the window as the car stopped in front of their building. The rest is going to take time. I know. I mean actual time, not one conversation. I know that too. She looked at him one more time. The city light through the window made his face half shadow. He looked tired in the way that tired goes all the way down, past the physical into something older. Come inside, she said. The apartment smelled like nothing because they had not been home long enough today to make it smell like anything, and so it just smelled like itself, like the particular neutral reality of a space that had contained 12 years of a life and was now containing something slightly different, something in the process of being renegotiated. Naomi put her bag down in the hallway. She took off her blazer and hung it on the hook by the door that she always used. She went to the kitchen and filled a glass of water and drank half of it standing at the sink. Lucien came in and sat at the table. He loosened the collar of the black shirt but did not take off the jacket. He looked at the table. He looked like a man who had run a very long race and finished it and was not quite sure what the finish line meant now that he was standing on the other side. She set her glass down and sat across from him. Ricci, she said, what happens to him now? He's being held. He looked at her. Not harmed. Held. What does held mean in your world? In a place where he can't make further contact with Gavin's people or the New York operation. Until the federal case resolves, at which point the question of what happens to him becomes more complicated. More complicated meaning? He betrayed the organization. In my world, that has consequences that exist separately from the legal system. She looked at him. He held her gaze and did not look away and did not soften what he had said. Is he going to be hurt? She asked. He's going to face consequences, Lucien said. I can tell you he is alive and will remain so. Beyond that, he stopped. I'm not going to lie to you about what I am. You asked for that. But there are parts of what I am that I can't make pretty. She absorbed that. I'm not asking you to make it pretty, she said. I'm asking you to tell me the truth. Then the truth is, Ricci broke a covenant that has real weight in the world I operate in. He will answer for it. The form of that answer is not something I can describe to you completely, and I think if you're honest with yourself, you know that the answer you're looking for isn't really about Ricci. She thought about that. No, she said finally, it's not. It's about whether you can stay married to someone who operates in a world where those answers exist. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. He waited. I've been asking myself that question since approximately 1 a.m, she said, and what I keep coming back to is this. I have spent 12 years next to a man who eliminated a threat to my neighborhood, paid my mother's debts, built an invisible wall around my life without my knowledge, and then sat in a ballroom and watched me laugh at a joke made at his expense and said nothing. She pressed her hand flat to the table. Whatever else you are, whatever the world underneath the world is, you are also that man. And I don't think you can ask me to pretend those two things aren't in the same body. I'm not asking you to pretend anything, he said. I'm asking what you want to do with the full truth of it. I want to stay married to you, she said, with the full truth of it, with no more walls between us. She held his gaze. And I want to understand what I'm actually part of, not because I want to be involved in all of it, but because I am done living in a house where I don't know the walls. I know. Say it like it's a commitment, not an acknowledgement. He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached across the table and put his hand over hers, and she let him, and neither of them moved for a long moment. You will know everything, he said. From here, no more management, no more protection that looks like distance. He paused. That's a commitment. She turned her hand over under his, held it. Okay, she said. 3 weeks later, Gavin Pierce was contacted by the federal prosecutor's office for the Northern District of Illinois. Felix Corda negotiated a cooperation agreement that took 4 months and cost Gavin the Veradon proceeds, his Hawthorne severance, and a substantial portion of what he had accumulated in 17 years of corporate maneuvering. He did not go to prison. The world is frequently unfair in that specific way, and Naomi understood this and did not spend more than a few minutes on it when she heard. Marcus Teal resigned from the Hawthorne board in December, citing personal reasons. Linda Forsyth followed in January, also citing personal reasons, which in both cases were the reasons of people who understood they had been associated with something that was now on the wrong side of a documented record and wanted distance. The 3 board members who had received Gavin's written assessment of Naomi's appearance and professional worth settled with Naomi's attorney in February, quietly and without public statement. The amount they settled for was enough that Naomi was briefly surprised, and then thought about the 11 months and the 2 years and the quarterly meetings, and was not surprised anymore. The Midwest expansion launched in March under Naomi's leadership. It ran 6 weeks ahead of schedule. The carrier savings in the first quarter were larger than her original projection, which she had already considered conservative, and the director of operations at Hawthorne, a woman named Carmen, who had been quietly competent for 8 years and had never once been offered the recognition she deserved, sent Naomi a 3-line email that said simply, "This is what it looks like when we actually do it right. Thank you." Naomi printed that email. She put it in her desk drawer. She did not tell anyone she had printed it. Ricci remained where he was. She did not ask again about the form of his answer, and Lucien did not volunteer it, and that was one of the compromises she had made with the full truth, which was that the full truth of a life like Lucien's was not a document with a clear beginning and end, but a living thing with moving parts, and she was learning, slowly and without pretending it was easy, to hold that. What she did ask about, and Lucien told her in a series of conversations over several months that happened mostly in the kitchen, mostly late, mostly without fanfare, was the structure of everything, the investment architecture, the people and their roles, the city beneath the city, its geography and its logic and its history. She did not understand all of it. She was not required to understand all of it. But she knew the walls now, and knowing them changed the texture of the space she lived in, made it real in a way that the comfortable unknowing had never been. She found that she could live in the real version. More than that, she found she preferred it, even the hard parts, even the parts that asked something difficult of her. Because the alternative was not peace. The alternative was a woman in a burgundy dress laughing at a joke made at the expense of someone she loved because she had decided the room's opinion was worth more than her own knowledge of who she was married to. She never wanted to be that woman again. On the anniversary of the gala, Lucien came home at 6 in the evening with flowers she had not asked for. Not roses, which would have been wrong, but something from the flower shop on Dearborn that she passed every morning. Something with actual color in it. Late-season dahlias in deep orange and red. The kind of thing that looked like it had been chosen by a man who had paid attention to what a specific person looked at as she walked past. She put them in the blue pitcher on the counter that had been her mother's. She turned around and he was standing in the kitchen doorway, coat still on, watching her with that look. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "You're doing the look." "I'm not doing a look. You absolutely are." He came into the kitchen and sat down at the table. She sat across from him. The dahlias were between them in the blue pitcher, which was not quite the right size but was the right vessel. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Okay." "If you had known, at the beginning, before the marriage, if I had told you everything," he paused, "would you have stayed?" She looked at him across the table. It was an honest question. She could tell it was honest because of the stillness in him while he waited, the way he was genuinely prepared for any answer and not hedging against the wrong one. She thought about it, properly, without the comfort of the version she might prefer. "I don't know," she said. He nodded. "I think I would have needed time," she said. "I think I would have been frightened. I think some part of me would have wanted to walk away and find something simpler." She looked at the dahlias. "But I also think, I hope, that I would have come back to the same place I am now. Because what I found out about you isn't that you're something I should be afraid of. It's that you're something more than I understood. She looked up at him. And I have never been a person who chose smaller when bigger was on offer. He was quiet. You chose smaller, he said, when you didn't ask questions. I chose comfortable, she said. Those aren't the same thing. She paused. I think I was afraid of what I might find, so I settled for the shape of things instead of the substance. So did I, he said. I settled for your safety instead of your knowledge. Yes. They sat with that for a moment. We were both cowards, she said, in different directions. In different directions, she agreed. Outside, Chicago was doing what it always did, which was going about its business with complete indifference to the small renegotiations of ordinary lives happening inside the buildings that made up its body. The wind off the lake, the trains on their elevated tracks, the specific music of a city that had been building itself for 200 years and intended to keep going. Naomi looked at her husband across the kitchen table. She thought about the man she had invented, the quiet, uncomplicated, unemployed man with no LinkedIn and no ambition who drove her to work and cooked dinner. And she thought about the man she had actually married, who was all of those things, and also the opposite of all of those things, who was both the gentleness and the gravity, both the hand on the small of her back and the hand that had spent 15 years making the city a safer place for her to walk through without knowing it was happening. She thought about what love actually was, which was not one thing, which was not a single quality or a single choice, but a practice, a daily and imperfect and costly practice of choosing to know someone, even when knowing was hard, even when the knowing changed what you thought you understood. She had started that practice late. She was doing it now. That would have to be enough. Are you hungry? She said. He looked at her. I'll cook, he said. I know you will. She stood up. I'll help. He looked at her again. That look, the one she now understood, was not mystery or management, but simply the look of a man who was still, after 12 years, slightly undone by her, and was allowing himself to be. You don't cook, he said. I'm learning, she said. She went to the refrigerator and opened it and stood there looking at the contents with the specific practical focus of a woman who was figuring out what was available and what could be made from it, which was, she thought, a reasonable description of the rest of her life. Behind her, Lucien stood up and came to stand beside her, not too close, close enough, and looked at the same refrigerator. There's pasta, he said. There's always pasta. And the tomatoes from Wednesday. Those are still good? I checked this morning. She looked at him sideways. You checked the tomatoes. Someone has to. She laughed, genuinely, fully, without calculation or performance. The laugh of a woman who was standing in her kitchen on an ordinary evening with a man she was still learning and had just been told that he checked the tomatoes this morning, which was both an absurd thing and an exactly right thing, and she did not have the words for why it was an exactly right thing, except that she didn't need words for it. He smiled at the sound of it. Small, real. She turned back to the refrigerator. Okay, she said. Show me what to do with the tomatoes. And he did.